For our last panel of the day, I'd like to introduce my partner, Michael Ledgett. Michael is a core member of our Dentons Canada Smart Cities think tank. He centers his practice on corporate and commercial law, corporate governance, mergers and acquisitions, public-private partnerships, smart cities, and the transportation industry. Michael's transportation industry practice serves primarily the bus, port, rail, transit, and truck sectors of the industry. His practice also embraces the emerging world of autonomous vehicles. Please join me in welcoming Michael to introduce our next panel.
So we've got a couple of stories to tell you today. This is all around municipal sponsored digital access strategies. And it's around how municipalities can help facilitate access of 5G to households and others in the municipalities. And I have two speakers. We've got Stephen Dykstra, who is to my left, who is the municipal business lawyer who supports Regional Municipality of Halton's digital transformation strategy. His duties include providing advice on digital policy development, cyber security, and IT procurement. In addition, Steve supervises his organization's privacy compliance department and supports the organization's risk management and emergency management departments. The other speaker you probably saw when the agenda first came out, we were going to have Michael Bidwell, who is the managing director of Digital Infrastructure Group, which is a project developer in the broadband space. And unfortunately for us, he was called away to meetings in Washington and can't participate. I'm going to try to tell his story. I can do that because we acted for Digital Infrastructure Group in all of its projects in Canada, so I can walk you through their model and how it works. But we'll start with Steve.
Thank you so much. I guess I use this little clicker here. I don't know if my mic's on. Somebody back there is pushing a fade. There you go.
Your
Thank
monthly,
you so much.
Steve.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm here to discuss municipal services corporations. I'm a lawyer with Halton Region, as Michael said. We had a unique opportunity a couple of years ago where there was a discussion about how do we bring 5G, how do we help 5G come to the Halton region better. And in those last couple of years, we settled on this corporation called Halton Digital Access Services Corporation. And that corporation is a corporation that is incorporated under the Business Corporations Act and in accordance with Section 203 of the Municipal Act. And the Business Corporations Act, for anybody who knows, is just the regular act you would incorporate any corporation in Ontario under. The difference being Section 203 puts some guardrails around it. And the key guardrails around that is if you want to use a Section 203 corporation, it can only do what a municipality itself can do, or put differently, it can't do anything a municipality can't do. With respect to our municipal services corporation, each of the region of Halton, the city of Burlington, the towns of Oakville, Halton Hills, and Milton are 20% shareholders. And this HDAS has what we call HDAS has a 9-person board of directors for governance and a general manager for operations. And the board consists of the CAOs from all of the 5 municipalities of Halton and a senior executive from each of the local hydro companies from Burlington, Oakville, Halton Hills, and Milton. And although the local hydro companies are not shareholders in the corporation itself, they are key stakeholders, and it takes all 9 of us to make the operation work. And I'm going to speak about cooperation in a second. So what was the purpose of HDASC? Its purpose is to provide one window shopping to telecommunications companies for the deployment of 5G throughout Halton. Telecoms have indicated that they would like to access our Halton region's streetlights and hydro poles, which we call the vertical assets, and to place the microcell transmitters on these poles, these vertical assets, to help increase the 5G bandwidth. So they're not very big. And so how it works, from our perspective, what we created or what we are in the midst of creating is this corporation where the hydro companies can approach HDAS and do projects throughout the region. The HDAS will take care of the permitting, the fees, and everything, so they don't have to go municipality to municipality. So it was in sort of challenges that we were facing. Why this sort of came out is, from the telecoms perspective, like how do they roll out 5G in a way that is quick, efficient, and cost effective? And they repeatedly emphasized this one window approach to us, how it would make them easier to plan and execute sort of broader range deployment of 5G across Halton region itself, right? Rather than going to the city of Burlington, the town of Oakville, Milton, Halton Hills, individually, they could come to this one window shop to actually deploy 5G. From our perspective is how do we get 5G, how do we encourage that 5G and gain its benefits? So we also had this issue of we need to control our vertical assets. We can't let go of control of those. They're very valuable. So we need to kind of keep some control over the process and the assets. And the answer to that is license agreements between all the parties to ensure that we still control the process, control the assets, yet allow for the access. So I probably should step back and, looks like I missed one here. Did I miss one? Can I go back? 5G. All right. Okay, no, this is fine. So I probably should step back. For those of you who don't know, I would assume most of you do, but we have an upper tier, lower tier system in Ontario. I see a nodder of understanding over there. Halton region that I work for is an upper tier, and as I mentioned, Burlington, Halton Hills, Oakville, and who did I miss? Milton are lower tiers. And so that cooperation was key between all of us. This truly was a partnership between the five municipalities and the hydro companies. It was a true partnership of resources, of time, of energy. Everybody put an enormous amount of time and energy into this project over the course of 2 years. That cooperation was key, and that cooperation will continue to be key so that the telecoms can plan and execute these these larger intermunicipal 5G deployments and really provide that one-stop shop for all these municipal and hydro pole fees and permits. And if you want to think of it the way I always think about it, it's sort of like the McDonald's drive-through window. You pull up, you order your Happy Meal, you pay for your Happy Meal, you go to the window, they hand out your Happy Meal. You don't care who poured your Coca-Cola, and you don't care who put the toy in the bag. You just want your meal and you want to go. And this is what's happening here. You don't have to go to Burlington, Halton Hills individually, get a Coke from one and a hamburger from someone else. You go to one window shop and they take care of it wherever you want to go in Halton region. So creating HDAS also allowed the key stakeholders to approach this in a very business-like manner. So hire a dedicated general manager, set attachment rates that permit the corporation to be self-sustaining, et cetera. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about sort of that, that business-like aspect of it, because I think it's important. So the corporation was born June 2023. Michael was there at its birth. Just before that, we took reports to all 5 of the municipal councils in late spring to create the authority to create it and also to get authority to execute all the documents. And as you can imagine, because there were lawyers involved, there were lots and lots of documents. The inaugural board meeting was July 21st, 2023. And the board continues to be comprised of senior staff members of all of the 9 key stakeholders, CAO level and CEO level. So it is, it has senior leadership involved with it, which is key. So we learned some important lessons, and I'll tell you a little bit about what's happening next. First of all, setting up an MSC, a Municipal Services Corporation, can take a long time. As I mentioned, it took basically 2 years from this conception of, hey, this would be a cool idea, to actually getting it incorporated. And it took a significant amount of staff time, as I mentioned, from everybody, and everybody pitched in that regard. And though, intended to be mostly self-sufficient, it does need significant ongoing support. It needs a champion from each of the key stakeholders. It needs commitment from, the stakeholder senior leadership, and it needs ongoing resources. And in that regard, for example, the town of Oakville is providing a lot of back office support with respect to, the banking and sort of the payroll stuff. So it does need resources. We are in the process still of continuing to negotiate licenses with some of the telecos. And we are still in the process of finalizing and figuring out the full extent of the permitting process that will allow this one window shopping to happen seamlessly. I do want to say, we've heard a bunch of things here today, and I kept thinking, ooh, that sounds like a good opportunity for a municipal services corporation. And I do want to say, they're excellent for entrepreneurial thinking. And municipalities aren't always entrepreneurial, but if you're thinking entrepreneurially, they're really good because they're very conducive to a business-like environment. They are super helpful when you have various stakeholders and you need to bring various stakeholders together. So there are other municipal services corporations in play in Ontario right now. They tend to be owned by one shareholder and they're doing one specific thing. I think they're much better if you have to bring, several municipalities together to actually do something business-like together. And I was thinking earlier, just it came off the top of my head that we were talking about software earlier. Some clever municipality is going to design a piece of software to help run its business and go like, that could help a lot of municipalities. And somebody would take that and put that into a municipal services corporation and could create a little business of actually licensing that software to other municipalities, supporting that software, and you could have yourself a nice little business. So you spent all the money to design it. We talk about intellectual property. Why not take an opportunity to perhaps bring some money back in for all the money you spend on it? So that is that. Michael, I think, is going to have some questions.
So just a few questions. This involves three stakeholders: municipalities, the hydro companies, and the telecoms. Who came up with this bright idea?
I don't even. That's a good question.
I didn't warn you about that question.
No, you didn't warn me about that. My recollection is it came out of just talks generally about how do we increase broadband, how do we increase 5G in Halton region. We have a lot of urban and rural areas, so the urban areas tend to be well resourced in terms of good coverage. The rural areas don't tend to be so much. So there's always been this push, like we have to get North Milton better coverage. We have to get Halton Hills better coverage. And I think there's always been these talks. And I think it was Ralph Blau, who's subsequently retired, he was a director there, was having conversations with the telcos. And this idea sprang from wherever during those things that, boy, if we could make this, if you guys could make this easier on us, it would be obviously easier for us to come and develop out projects there. So I think it was Ralph.
So another question, which I didn't worry about.
Yeah, okay, I like these.
So
Come on, bring it on.
municipalities, when they provide services and they charge for them, they can only get cost recovery.
Yep.
Municipal service corporations can earn big bucks. And so are the municipalities in this for the money?
I don't think so. I think we definitely aren't in it for the money. Now, that isn't to say, again, what I emphasized earlier is this is a very business-like approach, and there could be funds that go beyond sort of your cost recovery that is the typical model in municipalities. So there's an opportunity here actually to make some money off this and make sure it's self-sustaining and can go forever. But I don't think most municipalities are going to be in it for the money, which isn't to say they can't run a business and make a little bit of money off it, perhaps to use for other purposes, perhaps to plow it back in and broaden it, whatever. It does give a lot more flexibility if you'd like to run it as a business, to truly run it as a business with more than just recovering your costs, right?
Why don't we switch over to the next presentation, which I'm going to give, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Can you throw up?
Give over controls.
Yeah. Okay, so this is me. So this is a story about which we've labeled broadband as a utility. And right now, broadband is provided by the large telcos. It's Bell and Rogers and so on. And their business model is that they lay fiber optic cable, backbone in communities where there's enough people that they can earn enough money to give them a return on investment. So they have to, over a period of time, earn enough revenue in order to pay for the cost of construction and the operation of the network. So as a result, underserved areas don't get fiber, just because the large telcos and don't have any vested interest in putting in fiber. The other factor is that in dense community areas, the large telcos will wire for Bell will put in its own network, and it will sell its products through its network. Rogers will do the same thing. So basically, you're wiring up one community with two complete fiber optic cable networks, which is expensive ultimately to the consumer. The idea with broadband as a utility is that it's sort of like most public utilities, where the public sector makes available the utility to the public in general. And so the idea would be you would build a fiber optic cable in the community, and any telco or internet service provider could hive off of that network and provide services to the public in competition one to the other. So the developer of a broadband as a utility would wire an underserviced area, an area that doesn't have enough population to provide an attractive incentive to the larger communities. They'll get money to provide for the capital cost that they need to actually build it out from the federal and provincial governments. And as you know, both of those levels of government are providing huge amounts of capital support to ensure that every Canadian has high-speed internet. And they build out this network in an underserviced area. And any telco can, in a sense, rent that broadband network. And any internet service provider, whether it's Bell or Rogers or any other ISP, can hive off of that network to provide service to the customer base that is available, all in competition one to the other. So broad strokes, that's what this is about. And the natural instigator of this is the municipality, because it's in a position to bring together all these forces and apply for the federal and provincial government money. So when I look at the outline of this, we're going to address the 5 questions that are up here. What's a broadband as utility? DIG, which is Digital Infrastructure Group, and I'll tell you a little bit about their model. Then what's the role of municipality, role of the project developer, and finally the role of the entity that's created in order to actually to build and operate this. So first question, what's a broadband as a utility? And I've described it in broad terms as to what it is and how it works, but the factors here that make it a broadband as a utility is obviously that it's based on fiber, it's fiber optic cable, high-speed internet. There are many other ways of delivering high-speed internet. We heard the story about using microcells for wireless delivery. This is the gold standard for providing high-speed internet to users. It involves 2 components in order to actually do the delivery. One is the backbone, which is basically the fiber optic cable network, which runs by the households, the businesses, the industry, the government facilities that might utilize this facility. And then the second component is user connections. And these are the internet service providers that connect with the backbone and run the wire into the household, which enable the household or the industry or whatever it happens to be to actually use it. If it's Bell, it does both, but this bifurcates the process. There's a developer of the backbone, and then anybody, any ISP, can join on and compete for the business of the users. So we've got the backbone project developer and the internet service provider. Those are the 2 components. Two possible providers of this service is the public service provider or private service provider. I've talked about a model in which the private sector is actually the developer. Conceptually, the public sector could do it, and some municipalities in the province have in fact developed their own broadband for their communities. They would take on ultimately the revenue risk of doing that. They would apply to senior governments for funding for the project to the extent that there's a delta between the cost of the project and the amount of the funding. They would go out and borrow it. Maybe they would put some of their own equity in, and they're doing that against the proposition that there's going to be enough revenue from that over a reasonable period of time, 20, 30 years, to pay back the monies that they've borrowed and to provide the service. Because ultimately the purpose of the public sector isn't to make money. It's, as Stephen said, it's to provide a public service to their constituents. What I'm really going to talk about is the private service provider. The question about it's regulated and unregulated. A lot of telecommunications is highly regulated. This is marginally regulated by the CRTC. There's basically a registration requirement in order to enter into this business. The Digital Infrastructure Group, broadband as a utility model. Digital Infrastructure Group is a boutique project developer in both Canada and the United States, and this is their business. They develop broadband networks. And their proposition is that they will go to a municipality that will facilitate this process. And what they will do is to bring the development, which is design, build, finance, operate, maintain, and own an open access, meaning that others can use it, fiber optic cable network to provide high-speed internet to household and others in the municipalities. So that's the value proposition. The other aspect of it is that in order to make this work, particularly in underserved areas, it needs senior government funding. And the federal and provincial government are providing very, very significant grants to support municipalities in this endeavor, whether it's a public sector service provider or a private sector service provider. So what is broadband? Oops, wrong way. There we go. What's the role of the municipality? So, and this really just talks about the process that the municipality goes through in order to get to go. Normally what a municipality will do with any major project is they'll develop a strategy or a policy. So they do that. They develop a digital strategy, and that was certainly part of the process for Halton. Usually with the assistance of internal or external information technology advisors. Some large municipalities have all of this support in-house, some have none, and some have a bit, so there's external support. Once they know what the strategy is, they want to go out and find a developer. They'll do it through a fair, open and competition. They'll issue a request for proposals to design, build, and so on, a network to bring the internet to households. Again, usually with the assistance of either internal or external advisors. The process runs its course where they select and negotiate project agreements. This might be called a project agreement, it might be called a funding agreement, whatever it is. It's basically an agreement between the municipality and the project developer to set out what each of their roles are in the process. The public sector has three major roles in this kind of thing. The first is secure federal and provincial funding for the project. Second is licensing and permitting facilitation. They do this anyway, but they provide a facilitation process. And finally, community outreach and customer acquisition. They facilitate the process of bringing this online because the municipality wants this project to be developed, to be successful. There's no point in having a backbone developed and have it available if the project isn't financially successful. So the municipality has a vested interest in supporting the project. There is a possibility of setting up a municipal services corporation to hold any municipal equity interest in the project. I've seen the notion of having the municipality own an equity interest in the private sector developer. My sense is that it's a bad idea. It's complicated, it's expensive, it takes a lot of time, and it's just ripe for difficulties. It's out there, it can be done. There's a perfect legal facilitator in the form of a municipal service corporation to do that. So if the public sector and the private sector decide that they want the public sector to have a seat at the private sector table, then that's the way of doing it. And then finally, once the project developer is selected, then municipality applies for the federal funding. At that point, it's got the support of the private sector provider. The private sector provider provides all of the meat for the project application. It provides the business plan, it provides all the financials, it provides all the technology, it provides everything that the federal government needs in order to make a decision to move forward. The role of the project developer is the flip side to that. Normally they go and knock on municipal doors and see whether there's interest, to develop interest. In replying to the RFP, they form a consortium, which usually just involves the project developer and the equity investors, unlike a full P3 where you'd have all of the constructors and the managers. So as part of the consortium, in this consortium, all you need is the project developer and the equity investors, but they would get support from the organizations that they think will be necessary to move forward, which are the constructors, operators, the suppliers of the equipment, and the advisors. And then just running quickly through the other roles, they support the municipality in its applications. It forms a project entity, so you have a freestanding, separate entity which would be dedicated just to that project. So you're not having a project developer that's doing a half a dozen projects. You just have one entity that is dedicated to the project in that one municipality. And that's a good way of insulating the project from liabilities that don't relate to the project. Then they negotiate agreements with the constructors and the maintenance and so on. They secure the financing that's necessary. Normally, let's say it's a $100 million project and the federal government is putting up 30 or 40 million. So you need 60 million. The lenders would put up maybe 30 or 40 of that, and the private sector would put up 20 in equity. And so that negotiation of financing is key to making this thing work. And then they would form the project entity and enter into these agreements. And finally, what's the role of the project entity, this freestanding organization that's entering into all of the contracts? It's normally entered just before you get to financial close of the financing. And it enters into partnership agreements and the project agreements before financial close. And it oversees the implementation of the project, the build and the operation through the lifetime of the project. And seeing that the project is owned by the project entity, conceptually the project will go on forever. I'm done. Thank you very much. So we have 11 minutes. If anybody has, you look ripe for a question. Just get make it easy. I want an easy question. Ask it to him.
I really liked your presentation, and I think it's encouraging to see that the region has taken the lead in delivering service to its taxpayers, its municipalities. That's a great model and well delivered. Michael, one of the things that came to mind in the language you were using, am I correct in assuming that you're talking about public-private partnerships not being the model that would be recommended?
Yeah, public-private partnerships are different from this because public-private partnerships, at least in Canada, up to this point, are projects that are owned by the public sector, and they're financed by what are called availability payments. So the public sector is taking all of the revenue risk in the project, which makes a whole lot of sense when what they're building is public infrastructure, buildings, and so on, where there is no revenue source from the public infrastructure that's being built. There are public-private partnerships where there is a revenue source, and as yet in Canada, the public sector have not embraced the notion of having consortium projects, which is where the private sector is responsible for the revenue risk. I think we're going to see more and more of those. For example, the high-frequency rail project from Toronto to Ottawa through to Quebec City is a revenue risk project where the private sector is going to design, build, finance, not own, because the public's going to own it, but they are going to be entirely responsible for the equity interest. The money to finance it and to operate it is going to come from the revenue that comes from the project. This is quite different because here it's owned by the private sector, and the private sector is taking all the revenue risk. It's an ideal way for municipalities to spur the growth and access of high-speed internet to the households and others in their communities. It's not easy. As Steve said, it takes a couple of years to actually plan it and make it happen. But it's one of the ways that municipalities can deliver on the promise. It's easy to deliver high-speed internet in a dense community. It's really tough to deliver it in an underserved area where there's not going to be enough revenue to make it work. And this is a model that will do that.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay.
I don't think I prepared you for. So I guess my question is on the municipal side. We bring this company in to do this, and they build this wonderful backbone. Like, is there still control on the municipal side in the sense of pricing, or is it completely free market? Because I would be concerned that if they didn't run the business well, it wouldn't deliver what it's supposed to do. What if it can't make its money back? Does it shut down? Like, what happens if you?
Yeah, I mean, there is an insolvency risk because it's a private sector enterprise. What keeps the prices in line is competition, because anybody can hive off this network. Yeah. And so Bell and TELUS and Rogers are all hiving off the same network, trying to sign up the same household. So that'll keep prices in line. Yeah. It'll put pressure on pricing, on revenue available to the network. And so, but the advantage for the network is it's a monopoly. And so they control pricing of that. Right. On the other side, I won't say that word out loud. No, but I mean, it works because the telcos and the ISPs have a choice as well. Mm-hmm. They can deliver their service through this network, or they can hive off another network and ignore this one. Yep. So it's all market balanced. Yep. By competition between internet service providers and, well, ultimately internet service providers.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense to me. I just put my municipal hat on and go, if you invite this in, are you inviting in? But it sounds like a great idea. Yeah. It makes a whole lot of sense because, Rogers or whoever is going to go in there, if they can share the network, their costs go down. Everything, it just makes sense to me.
So I put my dig hat on if I made a sale.
I think you should call me and we should have a discussion about who we should be talking to, because we definitely, Milton and Halton Hills have needs. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask.
This is the purveyor of hard questions.
No. It's just a continuation
Sure.
because we only have the few choices of the service provider, and I know as a fact that Canada, we're one of the most expensive on data and minutes and whichever. Are we going to act like the rest of the world to allow more? I lived in Canada for a long time. This is home. I arrived in 1980. I study here. I only worked 3 years overseas, and I've been coming back since, and I've been back since 1989. And this is home. I don't want our home and our country to price out all the people that love this place. So are we going to allow more service provider to give our cost a little bit more competitive like the rest of the world?
I mean, the beauty of this is if you're trying to compete with Bell and Rogers head on head, as a small organization, you can't do it because you just don't have the resources. With this model, the price of accessing the network is the same for Bell and Rogers and anybody else. So if anybody else wants to start up a small internet service provider business with 2 or 3 friends and a little bit of capital and great selling skills, they can form their organization, make a contract with this entity to access their network and go out selling. And the way they would win is that they can outprice Bell and Rogers, because Bell and Rogers have huge overheads.
And we have to wait forever for them to service. But I actually might have a solution. But it could be too ideal. The solution
Okay.
is just like what Halton Hill and you mentioned, that for government, we're not making the money, but we can act like a business because we're hiring the best of people. We make the money, but then subsidize back it to our citizens.
Right.
Then we have all the accountability, the profit, but you're not keeping the profit, but you're putting it back to our users.
Right.
Yeah. I like that idea. I like the idea. I think we have to be careful as government what we get into, but I agree with you. We have a lot. We can drive a lot of things, and this thing is one of these things where we're underserved in certain areas of our region, and this sounds like a great idea where we can help drive really good service and perhaps open up competition. You could see a small company if your clients here can do this all over the place. You could see somebody with just enough capital to go like, okay, everywhere you are, we're going to go run a little internet company. We're going to try to get 5,000 of the 15, and we'll try to get 5,000, 5 here and 5 here and 5 here. And suddenly they've got actually a competitive entity that's underpricing the Bells and the Rogers and giving you a different tier of service. I mean, it's a great opportunity.
Right.
Okay, I have 2 somewhat short questions. The first one is, have you talked about this idea or this approach with the big telecoms? Are they on board with this?
Sorry, go back over that again.
Have you talked about this approach, either of you, with the models that you guys have put together? Have you talked about it at all with any of the major telecom companies? So Rogers, Bell, TELUS, and are they on board with it?
This model, the one that I talked about, they're very aware of it because there are the areas that are well served, and that's not a point of discussion. They know what they are. There are areas that I'm going to have to speak fast because I'm going to get kicked off. There are areas that are underserved that they know, and they know why they're not providing service because it's not. They know that the federal government is coming up with big grants. So they're looking at these underserved areas now themselves, thinking, how much government grant do I need in order to put in a backbone ourselves? So they're looking at the digital infrastructure groups as competitors to them. And Digital Infrastructure Group has been, the places they've been successful in Canada is that they've gone in and spoken to municipalities beforehand and worked with them, and to the point where the municipalities have become interested and wanted to develop. And when they send out their RFP, it's an RFP that speaks to the offering that that a project developer who's been talking to them is able to respond to. And so, not that Bell and Rogers can't respond to it. Of course they can, and they. I haven't seen them up to this point do that, but it's coming to your neighborhood.
Do I have time for the second one or not really?
We've got one more question.
Okay. The second question was, I know you mentioned that the project you're working on has taken 2 years or so far. Is there a way to streamline that process, though, given that there is the broadband, the province-wide mandate, where we achieve province-wide broadband connectivity by the end of 2025? So how can we align the time it takes to put a project like this together and get that out throughout the province, and then ensure that we're meeting that 2025 target?
Yeah,
That's a great
as we've
question.
run out of zeros here. So I'm looking at this red thing, counting me down. So I'll just quickly say, I think we can streamline the process. I'm pretty confident that what we did has never been done before in Ontario. So bringing nine CAOs, CEOs together to get everybody to buy into this, it just took a lot of time. The CEOs and the CAOs are very cautious by nature. They don't want to put themselves out there till they're confident about what's going on. So there was a lot of work there. I think now that we've done it, we would be in a position to go back to that group and say, hey, why don't we try something else? And they would all go like, well, we've done this before. It's kind of cool. It works. We like it. So it would be easier now if we wanted to use that for different things. But I think any major region that is dealing with something like this, especially with significant stakeholders involved, is going to just find it. They just everybody's just got to come along, and you can only go as fast as the person that's going the slowest, right?
You don't need any zeros because you won't have an answer to this, but I just felt I had to say it. So I get the sense that, very good intentions and both ideas, and I think that the biggest hurdle, as it always is regulatory bodies like the CRTC, which do not permit any companies to come into this country. Yeah. Quite frankly, having dealt with all of them, I'm a developer, by the way, and having tortured all of them when they want to make a deal with me, what I've figured out is that until we get to a point where, as a country, we decide we no longer have to have protectionism, and we open up our borders to actual competition. Vodafone, who is my service provider back in the UK, which is where I spend half my life, they could come in tomorrow and wipe out all three. They're bigger than all three. You don't need a small guy, you need a big guy, and you need radical change, especially to fuel 5G, because all of them, while they won't admit it, they can't make it work. There's not enough bandwidth. So I just wondered, how much conversation have you had around those areas when it comes to trying to improve things? Because I think about that comment about, there's a big bag of money coming. I think the government should be bringing a big stick and saying, if you want to keep your competitions, you service every square inch of this country. Otherwise, we're opening it up.
Yeah, the one thing I will say about that is that in the United States, that has more open-ended competition in the telecom world, every state has huge underserved areas. And so it's a ubiquitous problem that needs this kind of solution. It's not going to be solved by competition, because the big guys will only go where they can make a return on investment. Now in the United States, there's huge funds available for this kind of development, the federal legislation. So they're addressing it there, but they're addressing it the same way Canada is. It's just senior governments are stepping in, because that's the only solution.
I just have one quick comment, and then I know that's trying to get in here. My comment is, I have frequently, we did legislation, regulation scans like we've gone forward in the face of this, knowing that at any moment the CRTC or the OEB or somebody could come in and take jurisdiction over this and essentially potentially wipe out what we spent 2 years working on by regulating it. And so we have thought a lot about whether regulation is actually going to undercut what we're trying to accomplish. It's the way it is.